I await a motion with respect to the minutes or proposed corrections.
I move acceptance of the minutes.
Is there a second? The approval of the minutes has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
That's 3 people. Anyone else? Well, that is a majority of those who were here. I have been asked by our staff to make some changes in our procedure. The request comes from the City Council, and I'm told the legal department, and I put a copy of the changes in front of you. Members of the commission are asked to politely listen to the testimony and comments of petitioners and the public, and not to respond during the taking of testimony and questions, except to ask non-argumentative questions seeking information. Members will have an opportunity to speak to each other after the evidence is closed. They can still ask witnesses questions seeking to elicit information, but not for the purpose of making argument. I've been asked to change our procedures at the end of the testimony, and instead of my asking members, where do you stand on this issue, which was regarded as a straw poll, instead to ask for motions. And if someone makes a motion and it's they are the only ones taking that position, it can be withdrawn or voted on or amended. So at the close of testimony, I'll ask for a motion. The time limits, which I'll describe in a moment, are from our existing rules, and we have been asked to try to enforce the time limits. The chair has discussion to extend the time beyond the time limits where necessary. So the applicant's initial presentation should not exceed 20 minutes, not including cross-examination, which would take place after their entire case has been presented, rather than on a witness-by-witness basis. The opponents, then, individuals, have 5 minutes. Groups have 10 minutes, providing they consist of persons with an ownership or leasehold interest in property within 500 feet of the subject property in the case of amendments, or 1,000 feet in the case of planned developments. For text amendments not tied to property, any resident of the city or those within 1,000 feet of the city could form a group. A rebuttal testimony is permitted after the initial presentation by objectors, and they have a right to a continuance under the conditions set forth in the rules. And the applicant may also present rebuttal testimony after objectors have finished. At the end of all of that, the petitioner has 10 minutes to present a closing argument, and the members of the public have 3 minutes each to present their closing arguments. So that comes to us from the staff, but they tell me the requests are coming from the council and law department. So we can try out those new procedures. Our rules do need to be looked at. There are 2 attorneys sitting before you today, and they constitute the Rules Committee. Anyone who wants to suggest changes to the rules, could you send them to staff, who will send them to us, and then we'll take everyone's requests and go through it. You know you've been volunteered for this, and then we'll make recommendations. With that, I'll ask staff to do their presentation on the only other item on the agenda, which is planned development proposed for 2454 Oakton Street, a sports dome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first and the only item on the agenda tonight is the approval of a planned development for indoor recreation facility at Sports Dome at 2454 Oakton Street. Here's an aerial photograph, overhead shot of the area. The property is indicated in yellow. It's a vacant 2.6 acre parcel. It is part of Oakton Streets or Oakton Shops of Evanston Shopping Center that was approved in 2006. And prior to that, a steel plant occupied the site and was demolished in 2005. As you can see, the property is zoned C1, the northern portion of that's commercial. The southern portion is zoned I2, general industrial, and then the entire area is part of redevelopment overlay district. Here's an aerial photograph that includes the proposed site. That's kind of hard to see, but it shows nicely how the site relates to the surrounding uses. This is the outline of the proposed dome structure, and then here in red is the parking lot. Sort of extends on the dead end of the access drive. The property to the north is Gordon Food Store. The property to the west is the Cube Smart self-storage facility, and then to the northwest is the Shell service station. The property to the east is the James Park, and then to the south is the Pace Bus Depot. This is the actual site plan. As you can see, the proposed dome structure, as I indicated, is on the east end of the property, and then the parking lot is on the west side of the property. The circulation through the parking lot would be sort of counterclockwise. The parking lot sort of extends where it currently dead ends, and then one would proceed in the counterclockwise movement. There's a drop-off area here. This is the entrance building. So the drop-off lane is right there. It can accommodate about 3 cars. Then you would proceed through here and exit on the northern access drive. There's a walkway around the building. There's several exits from the Sports Dome facility, so the walkway is to get the occupants out to the parking lot area. The emergency vehicle access is right here in the northwest corner. It's also used for deliveries. The parking lot, as you can see right here, some of the stalls are about 17 feet long. That's one of the site development allowances the applicant is asking for. There are 5 site development allowances that are being sought, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Just wanted to point it out on this site plan because it's easily visible. And then there are 4 handicap parking stalls that are 0 feet from the southern lot line. That's the other site development allowance where 5 feet is required. And then they're not proposing any loading docks technically that meet current requirements, even though they have this emergency access point for vehicles that will be used for deliveries, but they do not have any loading docks. So those are the 3 development allowances related to the site plan. And the other one is obviously the number of parking spaces. They are showing 76 on-site parking spaces per code. They're required to have 131. This is the plan for the accessory building, the entrance building, the main entrance right here off of the drop-off lane. One would proceed by the check-in register, and then this is the entrance into the dome structure. To the left or north side of the entrance building are restroom facilities, and then the small party room at the north end. On the south end of the building are basically some offices and then some concession stands. This is the proposed landscape plan for the site. They are proposing to utilize the existing on-site stormwater detention facility that's located right here behind the Cube Smart self-storage facility. That facility was designed to accommodate the entire shopping center that forecasted some outlot commercial buildings right here with some auxiliary parking lots. So there is good capacity in the storage facility. They will be expanding that a little bit to accommodate for additional impervious areas, but the proposal will meet all stormwater requirements. I'm also going to point out that the site is contaminated a little bit, just like all the surrounding sites, because of the former steel plant. The applicant is in the process of getting a remediation plan approved by the IEPA. They will be required to provide us with the no further remediation letter at the time of or before the city issues a certificate of occupancy. The remediation of the site will probably be an engineered barrier, which is in essence the structure of the parking lot and the slab that the dome is going to be constructed on. This slide shows the interior layout of the dome. This is something that the manufacturer has provided. It shows the ability of the dome to be divided into 3 fields. The dome is basically going to be used primarily for league play, but can also accommodate performance games, performance training, so soccer, lacrosse, even softball games, any type of sort of group sports. There are no bleachers proposed. As the applicant will probably indicate later, they anticipate any visitors, such as parents or anybody else, to sort of group in the area right here by the entrance and then just sort of watch the participants. They're not proposing any bleachers, so it's not a venue for spectators. This is the elevation drawing that is also from the manufacturer. It shows the height of the dome structure. That's about 60 feet. Per code, 45 feet is required, or the maximum allowed, so that's another site development allowance they're asking for. So this is the view from the east, the entrance building here, and then, I'm sorry, from the west, and then this is the view from the south looking north with the entrance building on the left. This is a rendering that they've provided. This is sort of view looking towards the northeast, towards the entrance building. The structure, because of the way it's constructed, it's deemed as a temporary structure, and it will have to be closed twice on an annual basis for about 48 hours for the fire prevention department to do all necessary life safety inspections. This is another rendering. As you're coming down the access drive, the facility would be on the left, and it shows how the site relates to the 3-story CubeSmart self-storage facility on the right. And then I have the elevation shot for the entrance building. It's going to be only 13 feet high, so it's well within the 45-foot maximum. The plan shows corrugated metal as an exterior material. They have indicated that that's actually going to be a smooth metal panel for an improved look of the building. So, as I mentioned, the property is zone C1 and I2, and actually based on the fact that the property is within the commercial shopping center, the C1 commercial zoning classification is the one that's used for this property, and these are some of the bulk restrictions that the property will satisfy. The front setback is actually measured on the west side where the entrance is on the west end of the building. As you can see, the setbacks on the north and south are the side setbacks, and it will satisfy those 5 feet on the north and 8 feet on the south, and then 8 feet from the rear, the east lot line. The FAR is well within the 1 permitted, and then the height of the small building is 13 feet. These are the site development allowances. In essence, all the bulk restrictions where the development cannot satisfy the zoning requirements, those are deemed site development allowances. So the height of the dome is 60 feet, where 45 feet is the maximum allowed. The number of parking spaces, 76 on site, 131 is required for an indoor recreation facility of this size. Side yard setback, as I mentioned on the plan, is 0 feet from the south property line. Some of those parking stalls are 17 feet where 18 feet is required, and then there are no technical loading docks that meet our requirements, and they need to have one long one and one short one. So, as I mentioned, they are required to provide 131 parking spaces, but they only have 76 on site. So that's one of the site development allowances, and we have asked the applicant to submit a parking and traffic study, which they did. And their consultant has actually surveyed another similar property in Highland Park to get a better feel for the parking supply and demand for such a facility. They've actually conducted a survey of that facility on a typical Saturday morning, when that facility was divided into 3 fields and was also used for a birthday party. And So based on that survey, they looked at this facility, and when it would be divided into 3 fields, which would be the maximum demand for parking spaces in this case, and they looked at 2 scenarios, one being the scenario where the games on the 3 fields would be starting and ending at the same time, and then the second scenario where the games on different fields would be staggered, and they would start about 20 minutes after each other. And they've determined that in the first scenario, where all the games start at the same time, the facility would require, or there would be a demand for approximately 70 parking spaces. And that's if there's a spacing between the starting time of games on the same field. In the second scenario, where they're staggering the starting times of the games on different fields, the parking demand would be about 89 parking spaces. So the study concludes by saying that there should be a spacing between the starting time of games on the same field by a minimum of 30 minutes. So that's one of the conditions that is included in the staff report memo, along with the other conditions. Of course, any of those conditions can be modified by the board if the board chooses to do that. The parking and traffic study also looked at the trip generation for this type of facility. They have indicated that this facility is a destination facility so all new traffic that is generated by this facility would be new traffic to the area. They have, however, done traffic counts on Oakton Street at the traffic light with the access drive into the shopping center, and they've determined that the intersection and Oakton Street in that area operates at satisfactory levels of A and B, and even after the facility is open, the facility would continue to operate at acceptable levels of service at A and B. However, we have negotiated with the applicant to actually do additional traffic counts after the facility is open as a public benefit to see if any traffic signal updates and signal timing changes are needed, and they would do that to make sure that the traffic continues to flow at acceptable levels. So that's one of the public benefits. And speaking of the public benefits, as you know, all planned developments need to demonstrate a certain public benefit to the community. And aside from the traffic counts and the signal improvements that they would do, and of course the fact that this is an improved new development on a contaminated and challenging site that lacks adequate exposure, the applicant has also agreed to construct they've also agreed to extend the sidewalk on the north side of Oakton Street, which is right here. So that would be one of the public benefits. And then also they would give 15% discount to all Evanston residents for all programming in their facility. And then they would also provide scholarships to disadvantaged youth for any programming needs, similar to what the Evanston Parks and Rec Department does. All public benefits will be finalized in the upcoming days prior to this item being scheduled for the Planning and Development Committee. The proposal is also consistent with the comprehensive general plan. The proposal is consistent with the goal and the objective of the plan to have a diverse range of businesses in the city, and it's also consistent with the idea of promoting redevelopment of contaminated and former industrial sites. The project is also consistent with the goal for safe and efficient streets and network. Their extension of the sidewalk and improvements to the signal timing in Oakton, they would satisfy that goal. And then looking at the standards, staff does believe that this project satisfies all standards for approval of planned developments in the C1 district. This proposal meets all zoning requirements, as I've indicated before, except for the 5 site development allowances. However, staff believes that those site development allowances are necessary to have a development of this type that would actually be a benefit to the community. We do not believe that this project will cause any negative effects to surrounding properties. It is actually compatible with surrounding uses, especially with James Park to the east. It is one of the uses that is specifically listed in C1. In the C2 permitted district, and it also will be adequately served by public facilities in the area. So Based on our analysis, based on that analysis, staff believes that all standards for approval have been met, and therefore staff recommends approval to the Planning and Development Committee. So with that, I'd open to any questions.
Hearing no questions, would someone from the applicant like to begin the presentation?
Good evening. My name is Andrew Worth. I am one of the attorneys at Central Law Group here in Evanston that represents the applicant. I want to introduce you to our team this evening, and then I'd like to turn over the presentation without any further delay. First are the developers, Randall Main and William Kindra. They are with Mission Properties. They will also be the operators of the facilities. Next is Larry Okren. He is with Okren Associates, who is our zoning and urban planning expert. Matt Mejia, who's president, and Dave Green, who's project manager of Eden Fabric Domes, and they are the manufacturer of the dome that we're proposing. Eric Russell from KLOA, Traffic Consultants. He is our traffic and parking studies expert. Our architect is Bill Goshi of JLA Architects. Rob Belaski of Spaceco Engineering is our civil engineer for the project. They are all certainly available to answer any questions this evening. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to Randy Main, who will describe the project.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Actually, Demir covered so much of I should be able to be very brief about this. The intention here, of course, is an indoor dome facility, a large...
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't swear you in. If you're going to testify, could you raise your right hand? You promise to tell the truth and the whole truth at this meeting.
Actually, first let me introduce myself. Randall Main. I live at 321 Lake Street in Evanston. I've lived there since August of 1991. Chose to live in Evanston after enduring the culture shock of moving from the south suburbs to Winnetka. Briefly went to New Trier West and learned about the North Shore, and determined later in life, when married and with a young child, I now have 3, but at the time I had 1, that Evanston was far more in the realm where my wife and I wanted to live, especially because it's close to the lake and because it's not too North Shore. After living in Winnetka, I felt qualified to make that judgment. Having been here 21 years, I've become involved somewhat in the city operations, not operations. I've been a 5-year member. I am currently a member of the Parks and Rec Board. I'm the vice chairman of that right now in my 5th year. And founded the Evanston Youth Lacrosse Association, which started in 2008. Even before that, we were already operating with about 15 kids, and now we're up to about 400 kids, including 150 girls. Now I still serve on that board. I'm no longer particularly active in its operation, but that would be the source of my passion for youth sports, which is certainly part of what drove me to want to be involved in a project such as this. Before I continue, I'd like to introduce my partner, Bill Kindra, of Chicago. I will let him speak for himself.
Thank you, Randy. Lived in the city of Chicago for the last 25 years, and as of 10 years ago, was very heavily active in youth sports. I've met Mr. Main about 25 years ago as well in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. We were adversarial competitors. It's much nicer having him on my same team these days. We both think that this is a facility that is in great need on the north side, and I've been pursuing this more so for the kids and for the communities. And I couldn't be happier to be locating this facility here in Evanston. So I'm very happy. I hope you guys see that as well.
I also wanted to point out that Bill is the president of the Power Strikers Soccer Club in the north side of Chicago. In the interest of showing that our interest here is to represent and to serve all sorts of field sports activities here, not necessarily our favorites. So I will continue now. very soon I will be handing this over. So the intention, of course, is a large column-free field area. No, I don't want to go there yet. Large column-free field area. Our intention here was that we would have, if we weren't divided into 3 fields, we could potentially have a full field game of the major sports that would be, what should I do? Oh. Well, there's nothing really to point at right now. I will in a minute. Oh, yeah, I've got it. The intention for the dimensions is what I was addressing there, was that when not divided into 3 fields, which will be the most optimal from the standpoint of rental in a business, will be in smaller field use, and that will be the primary use. It could occasionally, given its dimension, and that's one of the beauties of the site, is given the dimensions, we could take away the barriers and go full field, which could potentially serve some other groups that may or may not find that of interest, up to and including the high school and other local youth sports organizations. So we hope at times that it could be served that way. The intention, of course, is to serve all of the local sports, youth sports organizations, not just youth, but also adults and all preschool activities. We expect that we would also have preschool camps and daytime preschool clinics, and I think a classic example of that, it may not be what we use, but Little Kickers franchise. We may or may not have that franchise, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. Baseball and softball training, we would anticipate would also happen here. We could divide the field in such a way that serves them. And as a matter of fact, it just so happens that the width of the dome, and then if 2/3 were devoted and a width, it actually would be a legal softball field for girls softball if they were so inclined to want to rent it that way. But again, we would consider any sort of uses. We've been advised that a grass court tennis use would be a very unusual and unique offering in the area that you can't find around here in an indoor setting. Badminton, it could be occasionally a golf range for a couple hours during the day. These are all things that we could and would like to do. Personal training, an aerobic or adult boot camp. We envision and have already had interest in the early parts of the day, perhaps before adults would go to work. They could come in and do that. Private parties, of course, we mentioned the party room. Birthday parties that would share the party room and the dome. The dome field could be accommodated. That's an intention. Okay. Hours of operation, you may have seen it in print that it would say 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. or maybe 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., but we really aren't limited to that. We really don't want to be limited to that. Let's put it that way. Our intention is to serve the demand as it comes fit. If the demand is there to start at 6 in the morning or even 5 in the morning, we would want to open and serve that. Or if it was to go after midnight, we would like to serve that if it serves the business model. For the most part, that is what I have to say about the dome and how it operates. I think it's time to turn it over to Larry Oakton regarding this picture here and benefits and the variances.
I'm Larry Oakton, Oakton Associates. For the record, 122 South Michigan Avenue. I'm also an Evanston resident since 1966. Seems like yesterday, actually. But looking at the site from an aerial view, it's outlined here in red. This view is to the southwest. Here is Home Depot, Oakton Street, the North Shore Channel. You can see that this is all part of the former industrial district of West Evanston, this line being the former right-of-way of the Mayfair Cutoff Railroad. It has a very significant industrial history, but of late, industry has faded from this area. This is a view to the north that gives us a pretty good sense of neighboring uses. This is the Gordon Food Service store, which only opened last fall. The self-storage, the Shell station, the auto service and car wash. The campus to the south is the Pace Bus Barn and Operating Center. This driveway off of Oakton is currently exclusively used by Pace. They have a control gate at this point. The other thing about this image that I'd like to point out is James Park. We're, after all, talking about a recreational facility. This is sort of a utilitarian area of James Park. The active park actually ends about here at this tree line. It's about 200 feet east of the active surface of the park. The distance south of Oakton Street to the property boundary is approximately 270 feet. Interestingly, the Skokie-Evanston boundary is along this fence line, so this gravel operation really actually is in Skokie. This is a view to the northeast, and one of the things about this site is it's actually quite remote. Not only is it not on Oakton Street, not only is it separated from the park, or the active part of the park, but the closest house on Hartree and Oakton is 880 feet away. We really don't have any residential neighbors. Here's the Skokie Swift, or the yellow line. This is the view to the east. You can see the parking lot of Gordon Food Service, the Shell station, so on, other things that I've mentioned. This is an aerial photograph that shows this site as it was before it was subdivided for the current profile of uses. This picture is from 2002. The steel company was actually demolished in 2005, and this is the part of the former steel company site, the 2.62 acres that is the site of the proposed dome. Condition of the site is quite degraded. It's literally a weed-filled lot with, it's sort of a dump site too, as you can see. It has no natural features of particular value. Actually, it has no natural features of any value. This is the detention pond west of the site, and the dome facility by right can release its stormwater into that facility, and it's sized to accommodate the anticipated demand of the from the impervious surfaces. Here's a site plan dropped into an aerial photograph. The parking area has been described by Demir, and you can see the circulation, clockwise circulation. The distance from Oakton Street, this is important in terms of considering the exception for height. If it was right on the edge of Oakton Street, it would have a completely different sort of visual impact, but this 270 feet setback, it's almost a football field actually. Likewise, the distance from the active part of the park to the building is about 200 feet, which gets us back to the dome, and I'd like to bring Randy back to talk us through aspects of the project that he was going to discuss.
Continue with this. Now we're looking at, again, at an artist rendering looking northbound. You can see, I'm sorry, I used the pointer. Sorry, east is to the right. That would be, right there is the vehicle airlock as it enters into the dome. You don't see Gordon Foods because it's behind that. You just can't see it in this view. On the left is the Cube Smart storage area, and right there you can sort of make out the Shell station overhang, and of course in that complex is a Dunkin' Donuts, Subway, and then around behind where you can't see behind this building in that direction is a auto repair shop. This, of course, is our parking lot in the foreview here. This is at the other end of that same view, looking southbound. Again, the vehicle airlock on the left, vehicle airlock and delivery loading dock. This would be our entry building and our mechanicals that keep the dome inflated. And then the front building, the front entryway to our access building. Again, Cube Smart is on the right now to the west. And this would be our parking area and circulation area there. Again, this is an east elevation. You can't really stand anywhere and see it this way because of the fence and the growth that's in there. But if you could, this is what you would see. This is simply the back side where the two emergency exits are on the east side of the dome. There's the emergency exit on the north side of the dome, and then of course there's one on the other side, and we don't see, but the back side of this is where the parking and the auxiliary building is. You saw this slide earlier. It displays the field divided into thirds, which would be when it's in sports use. This would be the most typical division. We're not locking ourselves into any specific division, but this is what we anticipate to be the most typical setup for rental. But of course, it could go long ways, as I was discussing earlier. You can just make out the parking lot here, and the circulation would, of course, go this way. People would drop off if they wanted to drop off and go, or go park elsewhere. Yeah, I think the circulation should work well for dropping off, especially kids. We certainly expect a lot of kids would be using this facility. And then parking, and then exit on out that way. And then, of course, here's the vehicle airlock again. Emergency exits here, and here, and here, and here. That would be the regular exit. Okay. This is, of course, not the view, not exactly our dome. This is probably a little bigger, but it does display interesting things that are similar to what we need to do. In fact, this would be rectangular longways. There could be a full field going this way. This particular shot shows goals that are set up for crossways. At this particular shot, they're in 2-field mode, but we would be typically in 3-field mode. That would be a very typical view of what the inside of our dome would look like. Again, I believe you saw a slide that looks just like this. Here would be we're looking towards the east here. Again, the entry building. The mechanicals are right here. They keep the dome inflated. This end is south, this end is north. There's the vehicle airlock from its entry looking into it. I'd like to point out that notice that the steeper sides are at the end. Snow runoff would typically run down the sides. There would not be much snow falling, or not snow runoff, I should say, on the ends of the dome, which is a little easier for snow removal in that regard. Again, this is a view from the south looking north. You can see our access building on the left. You can see the emergency exit on the south end, and then this will be a side view of the emergency exit on the west end. And if I didn't mention, but what you see here, what looks like ribs, are cables that actually hold the building down. Because it is a positive pressure building, it actually has uplift concerns as opposed to weight concerns. So the cables are necessary to keep the dome properly formed and safe and sound and not blowing up without control. I believe you saw this slide earlier as well. The only thing I'd like to add to what Demir had to say about this is that we have pointed out how we get from 76 spots to 90 spots. There are 4 spots here that we have contract in hand with the owner of the donuts, Dunkin' Donuts Subway Shell Station. That the moment we want these will be our monthly. We will rent them monthly. They will become our spots. We'll put signs on it, and we will be responsible for those spots. Even their employees won't park there anymore. On the other hand, this is GFS, where we have a verbal agreement in hand to rent, not to rent so much, but to use 10 of their spots during our peak time of year. These spots are shown as if they are specific, but they are not necessarily specific. They don't really need to be, but they are the ones that would be most optimal for any of our users to park in. Notice they're the furthest spots away from their front door, which is right here, and of course the closest spots to our front door. So these, of course, would be the least desirable spots for GFS customers, and to the extent that our usage would require any overflow on those peak usage times, and only on peak usage times, we would use the least desirable spots of GFS. And the way we propose to use this, in fact, is that we have no intention of having our customers really be aware of this arrangement with GFS. They might become aware of this arrangement because we will literally have signs on the spots that say, these are for sports dome use only, so a customer could park there if they want to. However, in practice, our intention is that employees, either our direct employees or indirect employees, for example, coaches, coaches are the best example. Coaches and administrators of our customers, people who we can talk more directly to and not be herding cats with. We can really talk to them and get them to do what we want them to do. We would use these spots for those kinds of people, and the way we would denote that for the sake of GFS knowing who's coming and going is we would have placards hanging off the rearview mirror of the cars so that GFS would know that cars parking in there for which they saw no customers go into their store, they would have to hang this placard, and they would know that their sports dome usage, and they would know whether or not we're using, arguably more of their 10 spots or whatever. That's how they would know who we are and how we're using their spots and when we're using their spots. Again, we don't have to use these specific spots, but for the sake of illustration, these are highlighted to show the 10 spots that we have verbally contracted for. We do not actually have the paper contract in hand, but we have the verbal approval that awaits a follow-up formal documentation. Before I move to the next, am I missing anything, you guys? Is there something? Oh, sorry? Go to the next slide? Okay, I'll move. Okay. Oh, and with this, I'll give this back to Larry. Thank you.
You've seen this one before. This is the site plan dropped into an aerial photograph. The next slide is the list of the 5 exceptions that are being sought. But this actually works a little bit better. 3 of them have to do with parking. The first one is 76 plus 14 spaces. Eric Russell from KLOA is here. He did the analysis and determined that that number would be sufficient to support the program if staggered in the way characterized. The second parking exception has to do with, I can't remember the exact number. Some of the parking spaces are only 17 feet deep. The ordinance requires 18, and not all of them, was it?
Let me address that briefly. The specific spots that are 17 feet are these spots right here. One reason why we hope that that will be okay is because that would have a bumper whereby a bumper in the ground whereby the car could come up and overhang the bumper, and actually that adds about 2 feet. That would be the argument why we hope you will accept that variance. And then these here are also 17 feet, and you will notice that the open end of that opens into an extremely wide entry and ingress and egress path, such that if by chance any car longer than 18 feet that wants to park in here, it would be overflowing into an area that is already wider than required for ingress.
I'd like to note that we've reached the 20-minute limit.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
And
We can wrap it up in 2 minutes, okay?
I'd like the board, when they address comments to the Rules Committee through Demir, to comment on whether they find the 20-minute time limit satisfactory. We have avoided the 20-minute limit problem in the past by the chair using discretion to ignore this part of the rule or extend it. So we'll extend it for 15 minutes.
Okay, we don't need near that much, but I'll continue. The third parking exception has to do with the absence of a setback for the handicapped spaces. Notice the character of the land on the other side of the fence. Usually this is implemented when you have neighboring uses that want a degree of separation, but you actually have it already, even though it's all on the other side of the fence. The other 2 exceptions, one has to do with the loading dock. This is not technically a loading dock because it fulfills other functions. It's an airlock. It allows larger vehicles to enter the building. We're not, merchandise isn't an important element of the operation here, so the absence of a second loading dock really doesn't impose unreasonable restriction on the operation. The other exception has to do, the development allowance has to do with the height of the dome. The ordinance says 45 feet. The proposal is 5960. Recall that it's well separated from the park, it's well separated from Oakton Street, it's well separated from the bus barn. It'll have some presence at a distance, but it doesn't really, at that height, overwhelm anything that's particularly sensitive. So this is the summary of the development allowances we just went through, and there's no need to reiterate them. So then we get to public benefits. Now, this is sort of a broad statement about public benefits, but all of these things matter. Most importantly, this is a seasonal complement to James Park, which we all know in the summertime is used to the maximum day and night. It's very underused in the wintertime. The peak season for the dome will be during the fall weather months. So this is perfectly complementary to our recreational programs. And the operators have agreed to work with the Recreation Department to coordinate these programs. It's a contaminated site, and anytime a contaminated site is remediated, that's a benefit to everybody. It's also a weed-filled lot will be improved. Any weed-filled lot anywhere is an affront to the community, and getting rid of this one or converting this one represents a plus. And this is a marginal site. This redevelopment started 5 or 10 years ago. This is the last 2 acres. The site is not well suited to any sort of retail use. It's not, has no visibility from Oakton Street. It's very tucked away. It's probably the most remote site we have anywhere in Evanston. Creating a destination use like this gives it new life and vitality. That's something that's a definite positive for the community. It's a private development with private money. There's no request for any public participation in any aspect of the development. So it will also be a tax-paying entity. It will provide a small number of jobs, but that's a positive. The comprehensive plan likes the idea of efficient building materials, efficient building systems. This is a very efficient way to establish protected play space without committing substantial physical resources. We've heard about the agreement to extend the Oakton sidewalk west to the traffic signal to allow pedestrians to cross more safely at that location. We've heard about improvements to the Oakton Street traffic signal. If timing needs to be adjusted to accommodate traffic operations there, the developer will take that responsibility. The developers are also committed to reduce membership fees for all Evanston residents. Now, this is in the realm of user fees. The only people paying for the use of it are the people who are using it. So, again, this does not involve any public money, and this preference to Evanston residents is a public benefit. Need-based scholarships will be granted to youth and adults in cooperation with the Recreation Department. And lastly, when Evanston finally arrives at a time when we have the sort of bike system divvy offers, there will be an opportunity to include this site. No one mentioned the bike parking that was provided in the site plan, but there's a good supply of it. And it's consistent with the health-oriented image that is intended here. So this completes the presentation, and I think we're ready for any questions you might have.
Board members? Are there any questions from the general public? There'll be a time for comment, but this is just, okay, let's hold that, and we will have a time for comment shortly.
I have a question, Scott.
Go ahead.
On the James Park on the south side of Oakton, if you're encouraging riding bikes and people are riding on the south side, which would be, I guess, the north side of James Park, toward GFS and that entrance, I think the sidewalk stops at a certain point. Do you recall?
No, I think the sidewalk goes as far as that traffic light and even goes a bit beyond it.
So it actually goes there?
Yeah.
You
can see it here. It actually continues along here. You can ride it all the way to the canal path.
Other questions?
What's the status of the IEPA report on the site?
We have submitted our proposal as per our environmental consultants. There's nothing unprecedented or unexpected in it. Our consultants believe that there is no reason why our plan would not be approved by the IEPA. Our expected approval date is somewhere in the next 30 to 45 days is the best piece of information I could get prior to today's meeting. I can describe more about the plan if you wish.
So relative to that, you're talking about your remediation plan.
The remediation plan, yes.
What can I ask? Did the environmental report say were the problems, the issues with the site?
It is very scientific and difficult for me to relate that. It's very professional language. We do have the report. The report is available. I could say that from an amateur perspective, it is barely contaminated. In fact, I recall some of the places where we went over in some of the strictest requirements that deem it as contaminated, barely over, and it was barely over in the realm of ingestion, as in if someone's eating the dirt, it's dangerous for that. So, but I urge you to take the report if you'd like the real details on that. I couldn't become an expert on it. It was just too hard for me. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do we know what remediation plan was imposed on Gordon when they built their facility?
That is a great question.
Staff know, or
would someone like to answer that? I believe I know this.
Okay.
They did tests. They did a phase 1. I don't know if they did a phase 2. And again, I'm speaking beyond my area of expertise. They chose not to remediate, and they do not have an NFR.
Really?
Really.
Boy, that surprises me. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So can I ask a question to
Sure.
staff?
Yeah.
So the proposal is asking about utilizing or purchasing, leasing spaces from adjacent properties. Are those site parking stalls in excess of required ordinance for those facilities, or?
Yes, they are. We've looked at that, and both facilities will continue to meet zoning requirements for parking sites. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I believe the gas station site needed 19, and they needed 16, and they have over 30. And I believe the GFS store has 68 parking spaces, where I believe they only needed about 50. So they will definitely well exceed their parking requirement, even if they come to an agreement for shared parking spaces.
One more, Scott. Can you conceive of or envision using that large open room for something other than a sports-oriented activity?
Absolutely, we can, but we'll be extremely sensitive to what kind of parking demands any other activity would be. So it would be restricted by parking. Absolutely.
Now, Tamir, do we have any restrictions on what a building could be used for other than a sports facility in that zone?
The facility is currently classified as an indoor recreation facility, so it would have to be a recreational type of use.
Okay.
If it becomes a convention of some sort, I believe we would have some concerns with that, knowing that this facility is not designed for spectators for any kind of event like that. But we would have to look at proposals on a case-by-case basis and see if they meet if they're one of those permitted uses in the district.
My partner did want me to point out that some of the ancillary uses we anticipated, I didn't necessarily deem as non-sports, but I suppose you could say it's gray. The birthday parties and perhaps the inflatable play gyms and whatnot, which we could call sports or not, would be the kind of thing that could go on in there, and again would not tax the parking supply.
Commissioner, sure, if I may add to that. What we've started doing is adding into the plan development ordinances a condition that if any type of use goes on to this proposed site, that would have to be processed as an amendment to the plan development. So that will also be in this ordinance.
Okay. And just from a practical point of view, as far as the parking is concerned, I suspect that a lot of people will park at Home Depot and take advantage of crossing over the street if they can't find parking spaces. It's just going to happen.
Well, our hope is that the parking study is accurate and that the overflow actually will not exceed the 90 spots. And there are free, unused city spots along the south side of Oakton, along James Park. To that end, by the way, we intend to, at the very least, passively post signs in our lobby that says, we want to be good business neighbors with our neighbors. please do not park in their spots. And by that, of course, I'll actually mean to a customer who reads that sign, I'll imply that I also mean GFS, even though I know that I will have certain specific people using their spots.
How many employees do you expect to have?
That's a tough one. At the high end, it could be 10 or 11 that are our specific employees, the two of us owners, receptionist, concession person who could arguably also be reception person, the way we've outlined that building, security, 1 or 2 people, janitorial cleaning services, 1 or 2 people, which may not be a direct employee, that could be a service. That is, perhaps a service person. I don't know exactly how to call it, but we might go around and move goals when goals need to be moved and put aside and put away or whatever. So really up to about 10 of our direct employees. However, between our programming, we would have perhaps temporary employees, which could be several coaches for clinics and sports. Certain sports things that are not necessarily games. The clientele, of course, would probably bring their own coaches. They'd be required to. We'd want to have adults on the sideline anytime when there's kids. And then, so that would be, our clients would also have their own employees in that regard.
Okay, a question for the manufacturer. Would that be okay? Of the dome? Yeah. Okay, I like the buildings.
Would you state your name?
My name is Matt Mejia.
And you've been previously sworn?
I'm sorry?
You've been sworn as a witness?
Yes, I've been sworn.
Okay, Matt, to create the pressure that keeps the dome up, you're going to be running off our electric grid?
Yes.
Okay, and what's your backup?
There's a natural gas-powered direct drive motor that is connected by clutch to a fan.
Okay.
So in the event of a power failure, there's a series of relays and so forth that automatically start the natural gas motor. And the natural gas, we use natural gas as opposed to gasoline or diesel or some other, because there's already a natural gas supply for the heater. So it allows the motor to run essentially indefinitely.
Okay, and just out of curiosity, what kind of pressure do you run normally?
We measure in inches of water column, so somewhere of a maximum of about 2.5 inches. And standard is, I mean, in calm conditions, it's generally around 1 inch.
Okay, and what's the fabric made out of?
It's a PVC coated, or a PVC coated polyester. It's manufactured by a company called Seaman Shelterite in Wooster, Ohio. So it's actually American-made fabric.
Okay, and when it snows, that would be the largest weight that's on top of your building?
That's correct.
And it's just naturally will melt off. I mean, it's designed to hold a certain amount of weight above and beyond the weight.
It's designed to hold a certain amount of weight, but we deal with snow primarily through shedding. So the idea isn't to hold it up, it's to hold it up long enough for it to come off. And so there's a certain amount of heat transfer that's designed into the building, along with a snow sensor. And what the snow sensor does is when it snows, it turns the pressure up and turns the heat on. So that in the event that, while we're having the snow event, the idea isn't that we melt the snow off. It's sort of like a defroster on your car, and that you just want to melt the bottom layer so that it slides off.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Going back to this issue about use, for staff, is uses such as music concerts or flea markets or other large gatherings limited in this?
We would not classify concert venues as a recreational use, like an indoor recreational activity, like a sport venue. So this would be limited to these types of facilities that the applicant has described, so nothing like that.
And it could be used for that by special permit application?
Exactly. They would have to come in as an amendment to the plan development ordinance that would allow some other uses aside from the indoor recreational that they're getting approval for.
If members are concerned about the use question, the customary approach would be to put in a condition that the uses shall be limited to those presented during the testimony. And then an amendment is necessary to change the uses.
Can I ask some other less important questions?
Please do.
So on the landscape plan, the east, north, and south properties, sides, there's a 5-foot setback, is that right? It's the very thin portions on the east side.
Trying to get to the landscape picture here.
That's very much the beginning. I'm just wondering what the materials are there, first of all, because it wasn't showing as, it was written very small, and it was showing like it's purple, and so it's not grass, so it might be walkway or something like that.
I'm going to ask Bill to answer that question.
When we had attended a fire commission meeting last week, they brought up this issue, and it was decided that it would need to be a hard surface. So it would either be concrete or asphalt, and we haven't decided which way to go, but it will be either one of those.
So it's a hard surface.
Yes.
How wide?
8 feet. 8 feet all the way around.
8 feet all the way around? And that was per the fire department? Or?
Yes. Well, the setback was per code.
So the width of the walkway might vary. It's going to be 5 feet on the north and south side probably, and then 8 feet or between 5 and 8 feet on the east side. Ultimately, it has to be wide enough to meet the building code requirement for safe exiting routes from the emergency exit doors.
I see, because that related to my other question was if we had limitations of 17 feet for the parking spaces on the east side, couldn't you just shift the dome a foot or two to the east and enlarge the parking spaces? So,
I think our biggest consideration on the setback, certainly on the east side, and on the south side, we also have 8 feet, is for snow removal equipment. So it becomes, could we do it with 7 feet, or could we do it with 6 feet? Possibly.
that makes a lot of sense because it would be dumping into the road.
Right.
Actually, the fire department said that we really only needed, I believe, Bill, it was like 36 inches of clearance around the building that they required. So our 8 feet more than overwhelmed that. So, and the 5 foot to the north is reasonable because there's no fence there, and even though perhaps our snow making vehicles may venture over that 5 foot line, I'm pointing with my hands, I should be pointing with the pointer. This area here, GFS has nothing happening here. There's a solid 10 feet before you get to anything of GFS's, and in fact, the only thing that is there is their dumpster facility section right there.
Go ahead.
One more question? So I think this is more for Mr. Russell, your traffic planner, but the parking showing going counterclockwise, and it goes from perpendicular parking to angled parking.
Correct.
And meaning that the western little leg is two-way traffic.
Correct.
And then the rest is one-way. Did you consider that making it all one way and having angled or all one-way parking from that to avoid that kind of, hard to perceive redirection in traffic?
Well, I may need Rob to answer this one as he laid the site out, but the intent was to try and maximize the parking stalls as much as possible. There's more of a limitation on the width of the site within this area that would make it very difficult to put perpendicular parking within there, whereas on the western end of the site here, it was a little wider and we were able to put perpendicular parking, so we were able to maximize the number of parking spaces with the perpendicular parking.
But isn't it difficult that, it's two-way just for this first part, and then people have to know the difference and then go one way?
I don't think it'll be difficult because it'll be properly signed. There'll be striping on the pavement with arrows. At the exit here, there'll be a do not enter sign so people won't pull into that point. As they enter the property, they'll be able to park either way, and then as they exit, they can either leave out or there'll be signs here that indicate to head back out that way as well. So it'll be very clear in this area that you can enter or exit with arrows on the pavement and the like. It'll be very clear just by the way that you're parked on an angle here that the exit is to the north and not to the south. It'd be impossible to really, unless you make a 3 or 5 point turn, to head back southbound in this area.
So all of the handicap spots on the south end are two-way and can exit?
They can exit either way, yes.
I can't speak for the project, but just for informational purposes, the question came up about the environmental, and I'm fairly certain that the process that you're going through, depending on what the IEPA says, based on your use, you may or may not have to get a no further remediation letter. But essentially, you have to tell them what your use is, and they're going to make the determination as to essentially safety issues or remediation.
Understood, but this is actually my opportunity to point out that due to our clientele, in fact, the No Further Remediation Certificate is a voluntary program. I think you must be aware of that. By the way you're speaking, I can tell you are. And that is exactly why we want to do it, because given the nature of our clientele, we want to be beyond reproach in this regard.
Absolutely, and I totally concur with that. The other thing is the site plan shows the parking. The one drawing, which I think was done by Yeadon, Y-E-A-D-O-N, it's AS1. I think that's the drawing.
Would it be that one?
The one that lays out the field, great. And somebody commented on or described the area inside there. This particular facility is really not going to be a facility for like spectating. I mean, there isn't like seating area or,
especially because of our size restrictions, we are not going to favor spectator activity. Yes, there will be space along this area here where spectators can stand or perhaps bring their own chairs like they would if this was an outdoor field. But it is we explicitly are not putting in stands for that very reason. It will cause probably less people to want to be there given our parking situation. And it's also something we don't have to worry about putting away. And so that in the short run, that's easier too.
Which, again, it's your development. I think that is a great way to approach this, and I think it's also important. It dovetails into, I think, the perhaps need to have bona fide areas that are for drop-offs. I've got 2 kids. I take them to practice all the time, and the times that I have to stay at practice, I mean, there usually is like 1 or 2 parents that have to coach or whatever stay, and I just think it's important that the facility, the users understand that it's really a drop-off for who's ever participating. It's really not a spectator, and I think that that's going to help a lot with the parking situation. But what I don't see, and it's probably there, is a defined or labeled area that's for drop off, so that people understand that.
And it actually is this area right here. This is not the best slide for it, and I can start groping around to find the slide, and I never know which direction to go to find it. You could argue that it's right there. It will be marked as drop-off area. And incidentally, something that came up during our discussions with the fire department, the width that is added into this stretch right here, including the drop-off area, was very satisfactory for them regarding fire truck placement, should there need to be a fire truck place there.
Great. And then the last thing on the drop-off, again, it's more of a use issue, but I know when I've had to drop our kids off at soccer clinics, say, for example, at Northwestern, the companies that end up running it, there's usually like somebody like outside that's kind of receiving the kids, because I don't know if you've ever had to bring your kids to the Northwestern indoor facility there by the basketball arena. That's basically, it's just a private area. There's parking there for Coach Fitzgerald, for Coach Collins, and a few other people, and that's about it. And so you have to kind of walk down that little road, and it's really nice to have somebody like who is involved with the program to be able to receive or direct people in. Again, I think it helps because it makes it easy for people to drop off and not necessarily take up the parking spaces. But it just as a food for thought. Otherwise, I think this is an outstanding project. As an Evanstonian, I'm very thankful. I grew up in Michigan, and we had one of these domes. I don't know what it was made out of, but it was utilized heavily. It was an indoor tennis facility. So I'm really happy to see something like this is actually being done in Evanston for a lot of reasons, obviously all for the kids. So thank you for taking on something like this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hearing no other questions, other members of the public that have statements or testimony. Sir, come forward and tell us your name, and I believe you've been sworn already as a witness.
My name is Howard Grimson. I'm the owner of Howard's Tennis, And all that I'm simply doing is that if in the future this facility may be used for tennis, I'm the man and I want to know who to give my business card to. I'm willing to teach that at all hours that this facility would be open. So who do I give my card to? Right here?
Thank you. Any other members of the public have comments or do you have a closing argument you want to make?
Especially inspired by your supportive comments. It's exciting for me as an Evanstonian to be bringing this to Evanston. Needless to say, being part of the youth sports community, I'm constantly part of conversations like this. You know, why do we have to take our kids to Highland Park, to wherever, to get these kinds of things? And so you can imagine that the general youth sports community would be in support of this. How could they not be? And of course, I certainly hope there will be plenty of adults using it as well. So yes, it's youth oriented, and that's where my passion comes from for this. But I'm looking forward to Demir coming over and playing some soccer at the place, and myself with my colleagues as well. I did also want to mention that we were talking about parking, and my partner wanted me to mention that given that community of users, we will be regularly encouraging carpooling anyway. Even though we really don't think we're going to overflow very often, especially on the days when we think we will, we'll go out of our way to talk to our potential users to really try to carpool. And these are like our people. It's our community. There will be nothing awkward about going to that customer base and saying, let's try to carpool so that we can be good neighbors for our business neighbors. I think that, Bill, would you like to add anything? By all means.
I'd just like to add that, you know, we are excited about this project. Randy is a great partner to go into it with. It adds to the community, and it keeps people in the community. You don't want people going out to where the facilities are, and I think from the Evanston standpoint, they would hopefully support this project for that reason too. Thank you.
Any other testimony in this case? We have closed testimony in this case. We can entertain some limited discussion, and we need to address the standards. Mr. Ford?
Do you want a motion to trigger this?
That would be great.
I would move approval of the project as presented.
Are there any conditions that the members of the commission want to place on?
As we discussed, just that the facility is basically providing sports-oriented recreational activities.
But would you accept that amendment? Any other amendments or conditions? I'll read the relevant standards. There's a lot of them because we're in several zones. Each planned development shall be compatible with the surrounding development and not of nature in height, bulk, or scale as to exercise influence contrary to purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Do we have any evidence that would support that?
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, that implicit in my motion was the acceptance of the standards.
The requirements are that we make written findings on each standard.
Okay, that's fine.
So. And 800 feet from the closest residence. Does it promote the public health, safety, comfort, morals, convenience, general welfare, and objectives of the comprehensive plan?
Dealing with a potentially contaminated site, it certainly is knocking that one knocking that back, improving the site that way.
Mr. Oakton, I believe, addressed the adequate light, air, and safety from fire and other dangers, as well as the requirement that it conserve and enhance the taxable value of land and buildings throughout the city. The overcrowding standard isn't relevant. Setback lines are not implicated. The testimony from Mr. Oakton is that it's compatible with the surrounding areas. In terms of land use and intensity, the housing standard isn't relevant. The preservation is relevant, and the remediation of the environmental problems is being included in the proposal. We have testimony that the parking is adequate from the parking study. Impact on schools is irrelevant. Character of business districts. We have testimony from Mr. Oakton on that. Neighborhood planning is probably not relevant. We don't have residents nearby. A lot of redundant standards since we're pulling from several zones. Is there testimony that the exceptions are warranted given the benefits in this case? And we should probably be specific on that. The first one is the number of spaces. 76 on-site plus 14 off-site. That's addressed by the parking study. Absence of setback on handicap spaces. I'll ask staff to address that. Warranted because?
Well, we believe that just like all the other site development allowances. Excuse me, just like all the other site development allowances, because of the size of the site, in order to provide adequate number of parking spaces, the reduction in the setback on the south property line is necessary and required to achieve the overall benefits of the development.
With respect to the zoning, to the loading dock, the testimony is there won't be merchandising, although this is partially on in a commercial zone. And there is testimony that the 56-foot height is not a problem because it's so far away from anything else. Is there any other?
On that last point, Mr. Chairman, I just add, if this was a rectangular cross-section, then the 60 feet might be objectionable. But given the curve of it, it seems to me that that minimizes the visual impact of 60 feet, even in addition to the fact that it's set back from almost the entire world.
Are there any other comments on the standards or discussion before we vote on this? So the motion is to recommend approval to the City Council, subject to the condition that the relating to uses, that was an amendment accepted by the movement. All those in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimously passed.
Just a question on the motion. Are any of the conditions from the staff memo included? Commissioner
Let's
Ford?
clarify that and revote it. Go ahead.
Yes.
Any or all?
All of them?
Any or all. Approved as the staff recommended.
So let me ask for, again, a vote, including all of the staff conditions. All those in favor? Also unanimously approved. Any other questions? Any other business? Any motions to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor? We stand in adjournment.
And just to welcome our latest member, Andrew Pigozzi is here for the first time, so came a little bit late, but welcome to the board. Was appointed, I believe, in March, but was unable to join us due to some work assignments, so welcome.
Thank you all.